On the 25th of December 1929, Larry Griffin headed to work. Working on Christmas Day was not unusual for Postman. In fact, it was one of their busiest days. Before leaving, he told his two teenagers that he would be home in time to give them some money before they headed off to a dance. But Larry would never come home, sparking one of the biggest conspiracies of the new Irish state. So before I get into today's story, I just want to give a little context for anybody who's not from Ireland. It's 1929, so we had been under British rule. 1916, we had the Easter Rising. This would lead to the War of Independence, which would lead to the Irish Civil War, because in a nutshell and in the most simplest terms I can put it, England were happy enough to give us back 26 out of 32 counties. So this was a treaty, and basically there was obviously other stipulations and stuff. There was the pro-treaty side and the anti-treaty side. So if you hear me saying that about anybody, so basically the pro-treaty side were basically saying, 26 is better than nothing. The anti-treaty side were like, no, it's all or nothing. This type of thing. Again, I'm trivializing and putting it all in a nutshell just to give you some sort of context. So if you hear me talk about someone who's anti-treaty or pro-treaty, that's what that means. So the Irish state, like the Republic of Ireland, was only established essentially in 1922. So in 1929, the government is only 7 years old, the police force is only 7 years old. So it's just to give you an idea of the time in Ireland. Larry Griffin was born in 1880 in Barrack Street in Waterford. He was the youngest of 6 children, and his father actually died when he was 5. When he was 19, he joined the British Army. Again, there was no Irish Army, so if you were to join an army, especially one of the reasons would be for money, it was the British Army you had to join, and obviously there would be tensions then with people, because you were basically fighting for people that we wanted to be free from, if that makes sense. So in 1901 to 1907, he served in India, and then finished or came back or whatever. And then when the First World War started, he signed up again in 1914. And in 1915, he was actually discharged because he had been injured. So like a shell splinter had permanently injured one of his arms, and he also, like, part of his ear was missing and some teeth. He was awarded the Victory Medal in 1918. In 1907, he actually met Mary and got married, and they went on to have 5 children. Unfortunately, one of their children, a son, I believe, died when he was 8. And then in 1924, so 5 years before our story takes place, a daughter died. So they had 3 surviving children. There was 18-year-old Alice, 19-year-old Jack, and they lived at home. And Bridie lived abroad in England. So the Griffin family lived in Kilmacthomas, which was a small town in County Waterford. So after he was discharged, Larry was happy to get a job as a postman. So this was 1915, so again it was still under British rule, so it was for the Royal Mail, and it was actually common for them to give these type of positions to injured soldiers. Larry was slightly broad, he had a moustache and grey hair, and like most people at that time, he was quite religious. So as I had said before, serving for the British Army could, cause tensions between people, neighbours, that type of thing. But despite this, it was said that Larry was very well liked in Kilmacthomas and in Stradbally, where he worked as the postman. Everybody seemed to talk to him. At the time, it seemed like there was no one had anything against him. So on Christmas morning, 1929, Larry went to Mass with his family, and at about 8:30 after, he dropped into his next door neighbour, Johnny McGrath, who was also a postman, and dropped in 2 presents for their young daughters. Before leaving, he told Alice and Jack, who were going to a dance that night in Bunmahon, that he would be home before 9 when they were leaving, and would have half a crown for them. At about midday, then he went to the post office in Kilmacthomas and collected the post. And so what he would do is then he would collect the post at Kilmacthomas and then head to Stradbally and deliver it out. So he then cycled the 8 miles to Stradbally. He came down Chapel Road, down past Whelan's Corner and into the square. So Stradbally basically just had a square and everything was based around that. So at about 2 p.m, he dropped into the Keeleys, who actually invited him in for dinner and a stout. So it would have been a very popular thing to do, that when your postman came around, you would give them money or a drink, or like that some of them would invite him in for dinner. So he went in, he had the dinner and a stout. At about 2:30, he dropped to the Cashins. At 3 p.m, he dropped to the Flynns. He had a parcel from England from one of the daughters, so there was actually like a charge on it of 5 shillings and 2 pennies. So another daughter then paid him 2 half-crowns and said she'd give him the rest of the money later. From what I've looked up on Google, a crown is 5 shillings. So if she gave him 2 half-crowns, that was the 5 shillings. So it was only the pennies then that were due, I think. At about 3:20, he went to the Cunninghams on High Street. Their daughter Kathleen would later say that Larry seemed jolly at this point. So if you can imagine, if you're getting a drink at every stop and like it's stout or it's whiskey, like it's not just like, oh yeah, here's like a little bit of lager or something. It's whiskey mostly. By the end of your shift, you're going to be on it. He also then called into McGrath's, which was kind of known as the Hall. So this is where people would go to play cards. Apparently the front room was kind of used as like a local card club or something, so people would go and pay like a penny or whatever and play. He dropped into Whelan's, which was the pub, and had letters for both their daughters. So there was Sissy, 19, and Nora, 17. He also called into the Garda barracks, so like the Garda station. It was a barrack, so like the Gardaí would sleep there. There was 2 Gardaí who were married and had kids, so they lived in the town, let's say, but the others would all sleep and live practically in the barracks. At 5 p.m, he dropped around to Bridget Brown, and again he was invited in for dinner. At 5:15, he called to farmer John Cunningham, and John Cunningham would later say that he would have offered Larry a drink, but he didn't because he could see that he had already had like enough or too much. So then at about 5:30, he headed to the small post office in Stradbally and waited just to, finish up so that he could head home. At 6:30, Larry left the post office. So back in Kilmacthomas, 9 o'clock came and went, and Larry still wasn't home. His wife kind of just assumed like that because he would have gotten drink and stuff, that he probably drank too much and then probably just stayed in someone's house in Stradbally to sleep it off. Mr. Brown, the postmaster from Kilmacthomas post office, had also been expecting, Larry to come back with whatever post he had been given to come back with. So when he hadn't, he actually called around at midnight. Midnight's a bit of a strange time to call around, but he called around to Mary at midnight and, said, where was Larry? And so she kind of seemed a bit worried then because he hadn't come home. But Mr. Brown, assured her like that, I'm sure he's sleeping off with somewhere else. I'm sure there's, nothing would happen to Larry kind of thing. So the following day, the 26th of December, St. Stephen's Day, David Connors was walking at about 7:20 in the morning. He was walking between like the road that led from Kilmacthomas to Stradbally. He was walking that. And when he came to a point known as the 5 Crossroads, as he was nearing this, he found a bike, and on looking at the bike he could tell that it was a postman's bike because it had like the carrier in the front, and it was just laid down. It looked like it had been carefully placed just near the side of the road. And he also knew that Larry was the postman for this area, so it would have been Larry travelling that long road, but Larry was not near the bike, or he couldn't find him. So the Gardaí were informed. So it was thought by even the Gardaí, like Larry's friends and the Gardaí, just all assumed that he was in Stradbally and that he had, was sleeping off the drink basically. But as the morning went on, they started to get worried. Obviously they, looked through the ditches on that road and couldn't find him. Larry's neighbour, Johnny, and another postman from the town, Frank Cashin, along with a third man, Tony Cullinan, got a pony and trap and travelled from Kilmacthomas to Stradbally to try, look for Larry, but again, there was no sign of him. Thomas Cashin, the local headmaster of the local school that was in Ballylineen, was the only person in Stradbally that had a car, even including the Gardaí. So he actually offered to bring 2 of the Gardaí, Garda D'Elia and Garda Murphy, around to, you know, kind of inquire and to search for Larry. A search was organised with Gardaí from Kilmacthomas, Stradbally, and another local town, and 100 volunteers, including Larry's son Jack. And they searched the ditches, they searched any marshes and the bogland and stuff like that. But again, they were just coming up with nothing. With Larry's bike was his cycling cape, and this was actually folded and strapped to the bike. And Johnny, being a postman, thought that this was, you know, knew that this was a bit weird because apparently if you would like fold the capes up, they would crack. And so obviously he knew that Larry would know not to do that and not to strap it to the bike, and normally would just kind of hang it over the handlebar. The bike was also dry, even though it had been, you know, snowing and stuff the night before. It was quite wet. So on his way back from Stradbally to go back to Kilmacthomas, Larry would usually stop at the convent, and they would leave a bag out at the gate for any post that they needed going, and he would take it back to Kilmacthomas with him. But they said that they left the bag out at about 7 on Christmas evening, and he never came, and at 10 p.m. they went back out and it was still there, so they took it back in. Also, the halfway house, which was about 200 yards from where his bike was found, Mrs. Walsh said that usually farmers from, you know, the local area, if they needed something posted, they would drop it with her, and then again Larry would pick it up on his way back to Kilmacthomas, and again the post was not collected either. The town of Stradbally itself was quite small. There was only about 270-ish people there, and again, typical for Ireland back then, it was quite tight-knit, it was quite religious, it was quite traditional. Father Lannon would make an appeal at Mass that day then, asking the local farmers to check their land in case Larry could have ended up there. The bogs were dragged, you know, the water was dragged through, and again there was no signs of Larry or his post bag or anything. Chief Superintendent Harry O'Mara was in charge of the entire Waterford area, so he, you know, obviously came down for the investigation, and he asked the Gardaí, so there were 4 Gardaí and 1 sergeant at Stradbally Barracks, and he asked them when the last time they saw Larry was, and, you know, if he had been drinking. And they all said, you know, that the last time they saw him was earlier in the day, and that he didn't seem drunk. O'Mara obviously was trying to establish, you know, like what happened to Larry after he left the post office. Had anybody seen him? Did he try to go home? Something else, you know, did he have an accident or something? Sergeant Cullinan and Garda Frawley had gone on patrol that day to Bunmahon, which was close by. O'Mara questioned locals, such as like the Whelans from the pub, and again they said that they only saw him earlier that day when he had dropped in with the post. Men who had been playing cards in the hall said that they didn't see Larry that night or his bike. So at the start of January, the searches continued, and the beaches and cliffs from Bunmahon up to Dungarvan had all been searched and dragged. It was believed that Larry had a sister in Belfast, so they also made inquiries up there, you know, for some reason if he had decided to leave or something. They also sent his description to Wales and England in case his body had washed ashore there. That's actually quite common for bodies from Ireland to head over to the UK. Larry didn't have any like financial problems, physical problems, mental health problems, anything like that. So they don't believe that he, you know, done anything. They don't believe that he committed suicide or that he tried to run away or anything like that. There was no damage to his bike, and there was no like blood anywhere or anything, so it wasn't like it could be an accident. And also again, he couldn't have been hit by a car anyway, really, because it wasn't like cars were a common thing on the roads. A young man came forward who said he had actually walked that road. He had been at the dance in Bunmahon, and so at around 4 a.m. he said he actually walked that road to get home, and he said that he was sure there was no bike on that road. It just seemed like there were no leads. Everybody in Stradbally were saying, you know, they didn't see Larry after a certain time. They didn't see him, you know, after he had left the post office or whatever. They didn't see his bike, you know, he wasn't drunk, whatever. Like there was just, or else they just weren't talking, you know, like again, small towns, they just weren't saying what had happened. Then on the 6th of January, Father O'Shea was the priest in Ballylinane, which was close by. And again, like, you know, back then people would trust their priests, and not necessarily in a confession way, but they would just, you know, he would hear things, you know, he would hear talk. And so he actually called for O'Mara, and when O'Mara went, he told him that the Gardaí in Stradbally Barracks knew what happened to Larry. And he also said to question John Power. So the following day, on the 7th, O'Mara interviewed 16-year-old John Power, who told him that he had been standing on Christmas Day at about 6 p.m. He went and was standing on the Whelan's corner, like outside the pub, with Paddy Power, who I'm assuming is his brother, Jim Murphy, and Larry O'Brien. He said that at about 6:30, Larry and Garda D'Elia walked around them by the corner. And he said that D'Elia, who was in plain clothes, civilian clothes, was wheeling the bike, and that Larry was actually like leaning on him, and that he was drunk, because they said like he looked like he was gonna vomit. Power said that they went around the corner, and that he stayed there till about he stayed there for roughly another hour, so till about 7:30, and he said he did not see either of them come back down. The other three lads, so Larry O'Brien, Jim Murphy, and Paddy Power were all also, questioned then, and they all confirmed the story that that's what they saw. So obviously O'Mara, went to D'Elia and was like, what's the crack? Like, you said you didn't see him after the afternoon, you didn't see him again. And D'Elia basically said, I didn't think it was important, like that he had been with him at that point. He didn't think that was important. A guardie did not think it was important to an investigation to say when you last saw the person who is now missing. So D'Elia said that he walked Larry up about 50 yards, up Chapel Road, as if to see him off, and that he then came back down past Whelan's corner to the square and waited for Sissy Sissy Whelan, because he was courting Sissy, and that they then went and spent the evening or the night or whatever at the beach. And he was adamant that Larry wasn't drunk. But John Power said that he did not see D'Elia come back down, and he was there till 7:30. With our restrictive laws or whatever here, you still can't drink in a pub on Christmas Day. It used to also be Good Friday, but they got rid of that. So Christmas Day you're not allowed to drink in a pub. Obviously there'd be fines, you could be arrested, whatever else. And back then it was it was done. People would drink in pubs. But obviously if you were to be caught, you'd be in trouble. So it is thought that Larry and D'Elia didn't head off then, that they actually went around the corner and in the back of Whelan's pub. So Sissy confirmed this and said that, yeah, she and D'Elia did go to the beach, and Garda Murphy also corroborated it. He said that he had been on patrol and he got back at about 9 p.m. and he said that D'Elia didn't get home, back to the barracks then till about 10:30. Funny enough though, when they were asked if they had been drinking that day, Murphy said no, but D'Elia said yes. So which is it, lads? It was common for the pubs to send a bottle of whiskey or a bottle of wine or something to their local Garda station, obviously as a thank you for the service throughout the year, but it was also as a bribe, because coincidentally then on patrol the guards wouldn't check the pub to see if anybody was there, type of thing. But the only people who would be drinking in the pub were the higher levels of society, so your shopkeepers, your teachers, your headmasters, solicitors, this type of thing. They were the only people who would be allowed in to drink. So it wouldn't be uncommon then if whiskey or wine or something had been sent to the station for the Gardaí not to have a drink, even with dinner or something. So it's just a bit of a weird thing. When Patrick Whelan was questioned, he said that no one except for his family had been in his pub on Christmas Day, and his wife Bridget was adamant that Sissy had been there all day. Sissy and D'Elia's story then kind of changed from the beach to no, they were in the old ruins, which was kind of across the road from the pub. And then Sissy changed it to, again, because her mom kept saying no, she was here all day. Then Sissy changed it to no, we were in the shed, in the back of the pub, and that she would be in there. She was in there for hours with D'Elia, but that she would just kind of come in and out to show her face to her mom. It's funny because your family could be up for suspicion of murder or disappearance or something, and all these things, and you could, by saying that your daughter was out with D'Elia or whatever, it could help your story. But no, she would, in her what, allow anybody to think that she let her unmarried daughter go off with a man in a shed. Sissy and D'Elia's story changed, so it wasn't that they were at the beach. The reason that Power didn't see them was because he then went to the ruins with Sissy, or that he went to the shed with Sissy. However, when the three men from Kilmacthomas, the two other postmen and the other man, came to, check things out in Stradbally, Frank Cashin spoke to Patrick Whelan outside the pub, And Patrick said that he had tried to get Larry, you know, oh, Larry was in a poor state, like I tried to get him to stay the night in one of the rooms. And then Frank Cashin went inside and got a drink, and again Sissy made a comment indicating that Larry had been in the pub. So the Whelan story wasn't really making a lot of sense. You know, that they were adamant that no one had been in the pub. A farmer who was questioned, Frank Galvin, admitted, yeah, that he had been in the pub that day at 7:30 with another man, Ed Dunphy. So like the Whelan stories were not adding up. The Gardaí stories were also not adding up. Kind of just their stories weren't corroborating each other. O'Mara definitely thought, you know, that the Gardaí knew more than they were saying. So all the Gardaí from Stradbally were actually transferred to different cities, and they felt like they might write to someone in the town, kind of, you know, and talk about something maybe. So they actually intercepted their mail. Larry's daughter, Bridie, who had been in England, came back, obviously, when she heard about her father's disappearance, and she came back with Larry's sister-in-law, Anastasia. And so they actually made a trip up to Stradbally again, I think, just kind of try to suss people out. And they went into the pub, and they, you know, were talking to I think Bridget and the two daughters, and Anastasia introduced Bridie, you know, and said, "This is Larry's daughter." And apparently Sissy just burst out crying and left the room, like, and then didn't come back. So obviously that's a bit dodgy. Another strange thing that happened was that a couple of days after all this, Patrick Whelan made a visit to Mary in Kilmacthomas, and basically was like, you know, oh, like poor Larry's in heaven now, and that you just need to make the most of it, kind of thing. So just weird altogether. He told her like no one had been in the pub that day, and he also was basically saying, so Glen Bog was one of the bogs, and the Gardaí were obviously searching it, and he said that after the Gardaí searched it, if they didn't find anything, he would arrange his own search party. But he kind of implied like, oh, but like if we were to find a body, it would cast suspicion on me, kind of thing. So it was just a strange visit, like. So a break came when Tommy Corbett, a labourer from Stradbally, went into the barracks to be questioned. Now, it doesn't say if he just voluntarily came in or if like he had been called for, you know, if it was the standard procedure or whatever. And at this point, obviously, remember, there's different Gardaí now interviewing, because O'Mara got rid of the other guards, so now there's different guards in their place. Which, if the Gardaí had something to do with it, you have to think like that's obviously hindering the investigation then, because for a week or something, they were the ones looking after the investigation. So obviously, sure, you're not going to investigate yourself. Anyway, apparently Jim Fitzgerald also came with Tommy Corbett. I don't know if he just kind of came to keep him company or something, but Jim Fitzgerald lived in Stradbally, and Tommy Corbett and his wife lived with Jim Fitzgerald, like they were like his lodgers, kind of, I suppose, but they were friends. So while Corbett was being interviewed, apparently Jim Fitzgerald just started casually chatting to O'Mara, and he said that himself, Tommy Corbett, Jim Murphy, and Patrick Cunningham had been in Whelan's on Christmas night drinking. He said that Larry was there. He said that Ned Morrissey was there, so he was like a local labourer and the gravedigger. He said Thomas Cashin, the headmaster, was there, along with other, you know, locals. And he also said that Garda D'Elia and Garda Murphy were there. He said that, throughout the night then, Larry dropped some money. He dropped 3 crowns apparently on the ground. And you have to imagine that by this point Larry is locked, like. And apparently Ned Morrissey picked it up and, you know, went to use it or did spend it or whatever. And so Larry realised and like accused him of taking it. And so a fight happened. They started like arguing, and apparently Ned Morrissey pushed Larry. Larry fell and hit his head off like the stove that was in the bar. And that was it. He didn't get back up. He didn't wake up. And apparently Pat Whelan, like, you know, exclaimed like, you've killed a man in my house, you've ruined me. Because remember, like, I mean, obviously the fact that someone has died in your pub wouldn't help business, but also remember, they're not supposed to be drinking there, so chances are he'd lose his licence if it was found that he had been serving alcohol on Christmas Day. And so he said that Pat Whelan like went for Morrissey, and that Morrissey, you know, assured him, he was like, it's fine, like we'll take Larry away, like no one will know anything about this. So apparently Cashin went and got the car, the only car in the village, and he went and got his car. And they wrapped Larry up in a blanket, and that Morrissey, Cashin, Pat Whelan and George Cummins then carried him out the back to the car, and that they put him in the back because boots at that time wouldn't have been big enough, so they put him in the back of the car. Cashin obviously drove the car, and Morrissey got in the passenger seat, and they went down Chapel Road and off. Jim Fitzgerald said that he heard them talking about the mine shafts. And apparently then Garda Dalia and Garda Murphy took Larry's bike. Now, Corbett, Murphy and Cunningham all denied this. They said they were never inside Whelan's. They said that they were on the corner and that they were passed out drink through the front door. A few witnesses said that. That must have been a thing that like nearly like an off license. They'd hand out drink. So they said that they had a bottle of stout outside the corner and that they then went up to Riley's, another pub, and that they then went to the hall to play cards. And apparently there was a fight between one of their lads and like someone else in the hall, and this was obviously then corroborated. So the Gardaí were obviously a bit confused as to why, like, you know, how the stories weren't adding up. So although it wasn't really a thing, Fitzgerald basically became like a state witness. He was taken to stay in Lady Lane Barracks in Waterford City and like for his own protection, and he was kept there then. So on the 24th of January, Ned Marcy and Thomas Cashin were arrested. Cashin at this point hadn't even been interviewed, because apparently one time that they did go to speak to him, he wasn't there, and they spoke to his wife, and his wife had said that they had had dinner that day, and that they then went up to the school to put like a statue up, and that when they came home from then, that they stayed in. They didn't go back out, and that her husband was nowhere near Whelan's. Apparently when they arrived to arrest Cashin, you know, like his wife kind of said like, what's up? And they said, oh, they want me down at the barracks or whatever. She then said in Irish, on far more Marav, which means like the big dead man or like the important dead man. Both men were taken to Waterford Court, and Cashin simply denied the charges, and Morrissey said that he had been home from 4 p.m. that day and he hadn't left his house. On the 26th of January, Patrick Whelan, Patrick Cunningham and George Cummins were also arrested. So the Gardaí then went and took evidence. So they got some clothing from Cashin's house and Morrissey's house, and they took Cashin's car. They then went to the Whelans and they took the stove, a bench, 6 floorboards. They took a shirt belonging to Patrick Whelan, and then they found other stuff. So they found a bloody stocking belonging to a lady behind the wardrobe in the parents' room, and they found a bloody flannel in one of the girls' room. Now, one of the reasons I could explain this is obviously they had 2, you know, teenage girls in their home. So obviously at that time there was no tampons or pads or anything. So things like that will be used. And this is what they said. This is what the girls said, that that's why they had them, which might explain the flannel. But what the Gardaí said was, why would you hide the stocking behind a wardrobe in your parents' room? After this then, Patrick Whelan's wife, Bridget, his daughter Nora and his son James were also arrested. So at this point there's 8 people arrested. I thought it was a bit weird that Sissy wasn't arrested, because Sissy is older than Nora, so if it was a case of like the age thing, it would be not a Sissy you take. But also Sissy was the one who was found lying about stuff. Searches continued for Larry's body. They tried the Tankerstown mine shaft, and this was easy enough to search. So basically in 1906 there had been a cave-in, so it only went down a certain amount of depth, and so it was easy for them to look and tell that there was no body there. But then they searched Ballinasisla mine shaft. A woman who lived near this one actually said that on Christmas night she heard a car like pull up, tires screeching, the engine was left on for 10 minutes and then the car left. And again, remember, not a lot of cars out, so it's not like this is a current, like a common thing, you know, like if people hear it now, you'd be kind of like, oh, they're picking someone up or whatever. But back then, cars were so unusual. Unfortunately, this mine shaft was going to prove to be a lot harder. It was narrower, like the actual hole. It was a lot deeper, so it was said to be 250 feet deep before you hit the water. And then they figured that the water went for another 100 feet at least. They also established that there was running water, which meant there was holes or something in it that actually was allowing more water to come in, because the water would rise, so there was like a tide, which meant it was attached to the sea basically. On the 30th of January, all the Gardaí, the original Stradbally Gardaí, had been suspended, so they were transferred to Garda headquarters and confined to the barracks and suspended with half pay. The Deputy Commissioner, Eamon Coogan, interviewed each of them separately, and it is said that he promised them, you know, promotion if they helped and told what they knew, and then threatened them with dismissal if they didn't. It was then said that he used a 2-foot-long ebony stick to persuade them. And the Garda headquarters is actually based in Phoenix Park here in Dublin, and it is said that the screams could be heard not just in the headquarters but actually in the park. Still, they all denied knowledge or involvement. On the 1st of February, Garda D'Elia and Garda Murphy were arrested. So there was now 10 defendants in this case. So, as I said, they were the Gardaí were all suspended with only half pay, and they were confined to the barracks. So Garda Sullivan and Garda Frawley were the two guards I mentioned earlier that had families in Stradbally. So obviously it was difficult because they couldn't go home and see their families, they couldn't see their wives, and also the money was going to cause a huge strain on them as well. Finally, Mrs. Frawley broke, and she told the investigating officers that on the 7th of January, D'Elia had arrived at their home looking to speak to her husband, and that he told her, like, he went in to speak to her husband and told her to go down and lock the doors in case any of the other guards came in, and that after a while then he left, and when he was leaving he told her to not tell anyone that himself and Larry had been in her home on Christmas Day. If you remember, January 7th was the day that they interviewed John Power. Mrs. Sullivan also urged her husband to, speak and tell whatever she knew. So eventually then Garda Sullivan also admitted what he knew. So he basically told them then that he and Garda Frawley had basically went on a bit of a binge on Christmas Day. They, had been to each other's houses for a drink. They then went to Whelan's for a drink. They went to Riley's for a drink, and then back to the barracks for a drink. Then they both went to their houses separately for their dinner. And then again, they went to Whelan's for a drink, Riley's for a drink, and back to the barracks. And so Garda Sullivan said that he basically spent the rest of the day. Then he was back by about 4 o'clock. And he said he spent the rest of the day basically in bed, like sleeping off the drink. And he said he woke at 12:30 at night, like midnight, with Garda D'Elia and Garda Murphy coming in. So the Garda Commissioner, Ono Duffy, so he was obviously basically like in charge of all of the Garda Síochána. He was growing very frustrated, with trying to, find leads and stuff like that. And he actually asked Bishop Hackett, so he was like the bishop for Waterford, to go to Stradbally and appeal to the locals to speak to the Gardaí about what they knew. And he refused to. However, they went to the convent, remember where the post was supposed to be picked up, and the Reverend Mother told them that one of the nights there was someone digging in either the convent grounds or the graveyard at like a crazy hour of the night. On the 7th of February at Waterford Courthouse, the 10 defendants were brought in. During his opening statement, the prosecutor, Mr. Finlay, would actually suggest that while Morrissey and Larry were fighting, Cashin got involved and hit Larry, and that this might have been why he fell backwards. So apparently there was bad blood between Larry Griffin and Thomas Cashin. Apparently Cashin, being, the headmaster, expected his post to be delivered before he went for work. And Larry, from what I can tell, was, would stop and talk to everyone. So by the time he even made it from Kilmacthomas to Stradbally, he could have stopped a couple of times to speak to people. And so it would always be later in the day when he got there. And so this obviously annoyed Cashin, and apparently he actually complained to the post office about Larry. Also, Thomas Cashin was on the anti-treaty side of the Civil War. He was involved in the Republican movement, so the IRA, and so he wouldn't have been happy with the fact that Larry had served for the British Army. And so even though it is kind of said that everybody, liked Larry or whatever, I think Cashin was such a staunch Republican that they think that there was bad blood between them from this, and that's probably even why the whole I want my post at this time. When the prosecution called their state witness, Jim Fitzgerald, everyone was shocked. So even though he had gone missing after all this was going on, no one seemed to tie it to what was happening with the Larry Griffin case, and so everybody was shocked. But when he got up to testify, as soon as the prosecution started asking him questions, he was changing his story, and eventually he just denied it, and he basically said that he didn't voluntarily go to the Garda station, that the Gardaí forced him to go there and then, questioned him under duress. So Mr. Finlay just had to ask for like an adjournment for them to gather more evidence. That same day, Garda Commissioner O'Duffy, like, he was just so annoyed and so frustrated, and he actually demanded that all new grave sites, newly dug graves, were to be dug up and to check if Larry had been put in one of them. So just imagine again, remember I said the Gardaí are only 7 years old. A lot of them like that got their jobs because they had been on the pro-treaty side, and it just kind of came from that. They weren't necessarily, they were probably good like soldiers in that sense, but they weren't good like policemen, if that makes sense. So like a lot of them, this would have been the first type of like horrific dark thing like that they had to deal with. They basically had to like dig up every grave, like lift the coffin out, check under where the coffin had been for his body, open the coffins, pull that body out, check if he was under that. They, over a fortnight, they done 24 graves out of 6 graveyards, and they had to do it at night because obviously nobody could know that they were doing that. So it had to be in the dark at night to avoid like the press. On the 14th of February, when the case was back, John Power testified obviously to what he had saw. 2 of the men that had come from Kilmacthomas said about Patrick Whelan saying that Larry had been there the night before and that he had tried to get him to stay because he was so drunk. The pathologist, Dr. McGrath, went through, the evidence that they had taken. So the trousers that they took from Morrissey and Casham had stains they had blood stains on them, but they couldn't do the test to see if it was human blood because it was contaminated by dirt. Again, remember, that's as far as they can go at this stage to determine if something is human blood. They can't tell blood type. They can't tell like DNA or anything like that. So as much as they can do is to see if it's human blood, and they couldn't because of the dirt that was contaminating it. Again, on Cashin's car, there were 2 stains on one of the door panels, but again, they were too small to actually test to see if it was human blood. The same for Whelan's shirt. There was 6 stains on his, but again, they were too small to test. Apparently the stove and floorboards actually came back with nothing on them, which is, if he had fallen that way and hit his head off the stove or something, you would think that there would be blood on the stove or on the floorboards. Not surprisingly, the flannel and stocking tested positive for human blood, but again, this could be for sanitary reasons, and that's obviously what the defendants argued. And without being able to check blood type or blood DNA or like DNA or anything like that, there's no way to say it. So if the girls say no, that we use them, like, they can't prove that they don't. So the case was just not looking good at all. The search for Larry hit a blow on the 17th of February. They had gotten a professional diver from Liverpool to come over to go down the shaft in Ballinasisla, that shaft. And he basically done like 2, small descents to check it out. So he would go down and he was checking like the walls and stuff for their sturdiness and stuff. But unfortunately then he concluded that it was too dangerous to go down. He basically said like if he or someone else was to go down into the water to search it, the water was too dark, he said, to actually really see anything. Again, you didn't know how far it was going down because it was running water, there was that risk, and also because it was so narrow, if any of the bricks were to fall down, whoever is down there would be trapped. So basically all they could do was put down like grabbers and to like kind of go through the water and hopefully grab something up. And they were hoping that even if they were to find like some of Larry's clothes or the post bag or something, it would indicate that he had been put down there. On the 21st of February, the trial was back again, and Paddy Power testified to corroborate John Power's testimony. Bridget Frawley also testified that Garda D'Elia and Larry Griffin were in her home on Christmas Day, and that Larry was very clearly drunk, and she said that with her husband the 3 men left, and that her husband arrived back then a short while after. The case was adjourned again, and on the 1st of March, Mr. Finlay asked Justice McCabe. He basically told him they have no new evidence, but he asked him for one last adjournment to keep them on remand, because he said they were close to getting Larry's body. Unfortunately, the following week, on the 7th of March, they didn't have the body and they had no more evidence, and so the case was dropped. The 2 Gardaí were ordered to get the first train back to Dublin, and the other 8 defendants had lunch at the Waterford Hotel and then went back to Stradbally for a celebrations in Whelan's. O'Duffy, the Garda Commissioner, was just not happy with how the case was going in general, and he was blaming it on O'Mara. So he actually brought in Superintendent James Hunt from Galway. So technically, O'Mara was chief superintendent and Hunt was superintendent, which essentially meant that O'Mara was his superior, but now Hunt was going to be leading his investigation. So that was basically a bit of a... After the trial, Jim Fitzgerald, even though he technically didn't testify against anybody, was treated like a social outcast. He couldn't get any work and he was getting threats apparently. And actually after a few days of this, he disappeared again and he was reported missing. However, it turned out that James Hunt had contacted him, and Fitzgerald basically said that if he could get him out of Stradbally, he would tell him the truth. So on the 14th of March, James Hunt actually arranged some work with a farmer in Galway for Jim Fitzgerald, and so he moved to Galway. On the 16th, James Hunt then went up and met Jim Fitzgerald to speak to him. So Jim Fitzgerald basically said that on Christmas Day he did go to Whelan's at about 7:30 or 8, and he said he went in the back and had a drink. He said he saw Larry Griffin with Garda Delia in the pub in Whelan's, but he said he left at about 8:20 and he met the other three men, Corbett, Cunningham and Murphy, outside, and that they did then have a drink, pass through the door, and that they went to Riley's and then onto the hall, and then there was a fight in the hall, and so Corbett and Fitzgerald, they all left to go home, and Corbett and Fitzgerald, who lived together, basically went home, and that was that. This would explain why the other three men's version of events never matched Jim Fitzgerald. So because they were like, we were never in Whelan's, we were here with them, and whatever. So then that kind of everything else makes sense. He said it was a few days after Christmas that Corbett told him the version of events that he had then given the guards, because apparently Patrick Cunningham, after they left the hall, didn't go home. He went back to Whelan's and had a drink, and he said that he was there and that between 11 and 11:30 Larry died. But Patrick Cunningham didn't tell Corbett any of the other stuff. So Fitzgerald said that he actually heard about them wrapping him in a blanket, putting him in the car, all of that stuff, that he actually had heard that from other sources then. O'Duffy, after the trial, threw the 4 Gardaí out of the force, and on the 24th of April he transferred O'Mara. On the 1st of May, Mrs. O'Sullivan went to Stradbally Barracks and spoke to the Gardaí there, and basically said what would they get if Frawley and Sullivan could locate Larry's body. And so one of the Gardaí, Garda Hanley, on instruction from Hunt, told her that they would be reinstated if they could find where Larry was. And so she basically said to give them a week. The following day, the 2nd, Mrs. Frawley then went to Hanley and basically said that her husband had spoke to Ned Morrissey, and that he told him that Larry was in Glenn's bog. Apparently Morrissey was actually going to bring Frawley to show him where in the bog, and so the idea was that Hanley would actually follow them, but I can't see anything further on this, and also obviously then they didn't find him. So Miss Orpin, a young woman, came forward then to say that she had actually been courted by James Whelan, Patrick's son, and on Christmas Day her and her sister had been visiting family in Stradbally, and when they were heading home that James went with them, walked them home, and that he, I don't know if he was trying to impress her or something, but he basically said because in a way it sounds really crappy, and in another way I get the whole kind of oh, because I want to be with you, but he apparently said that his mother was really was trying her best to make him bring Larry home, to make sure that Larry got home safe, and that he refused to do it because he wouldn't miss out on seeing Miss Orpin. On the 10th of May, Cashin was finally interviewed by Hunt, but again his version of events was basically that he hadn't been anywhere near Whelan's pub, that he had done what his wife had said, that they had dinner, that they went off to the school, and that when they came back then that was it, they were in. But some witnesses did say that they saw Cashin during the day at Whelan's getting a bottle of stout or something from the front door, so obviously he was there at some point. On the 15th of May, the Byrnes, a couple who had lived in Stradbally but then moved to Dungarvan, came forward, and Mrs. Byrne apparently had, been quite close to Sissy. Apparently she would always tell her secrets, like even about her and like your man Dalia and stuff. And so on a couple of occasions when she had been in Stradbally since this incident, Larry was brought up once, the disappearance of Larry, and that Sissy told her that Larry had died in the barracks. On the 22nd of May, Frawley went to Garda Hanley and told him that he had gotten quite close to Thomas Cashin, and that Thomas Cashin told him that Larry did in fact die in Whelan's. The following week, on the 29th, Frawley, Cashin were seen surveying Glens Bog, and Patrick Whelan was like apparently just hanging around on the side of the road. Gardaí believed that this was gonna be like some sort of like plot to find the body. On the 4th of June, 20 villagers actually did go out and start searching the bog again, but nothing came of it. So James Hunt, like his predecessor O'Mara, was really feeling the pressure of the case, like that it just wasn't going anywhere, and obviously he was getting so much pressure from O'Duffy coming down. And so on the 21st of June, he left and went back to Galway, and he wouldn't send his final report until January 1931. In his report, he says that Jim Murphy told him that Ned Morrissey was not in Whelan's that night. He said that his social standing wouldn't have got him into the pub, basically. Because if you remember, I told you that only like certain people would have been allowed in on Christmas Day. And also, Jim Fitzgerald, when he said his second statement about going in for a drink on his own, he said that he went in the back, and originally when he, knocked on the door, whoever opened it actually wasn't going to let him in, again, because he was just like a labourer. And so he kind of, I think it was a bit kind of like, oh, please, just one drink kind of thing. And so they let him in. So it would actually, they were saying it would be actually unusual for Ned Morrissey to have been in the pub on Christmas Day. Larry O'Brien also said that he called to Morrissey's on Christmas Day between 8:30 and 9, and that like Ned Morrissey was sitting up, boots off, feet against the fire. Hunt said that he believed that it was actually Cashin who had the fight with Larry, and that he was the one who pushed him or hit him or whatever, and that he fell and hit his head against the stove. And he thinks that he was then brought to the barracks and that he died here. He also thinks that Patrick Whelan actually wouldn't have been present to, make any remarks or see anything, because apparently at this point he was actually really extremely drunk. At the courthouse, the Gardaí that would have been taking the defendants in and out said that they heard Ned Morrissey's wife say to him, remember Ned, you have a tongue in your cheek, now keep it there. And she said that they had been better off now than they ever were, thanks to Mrs. Cashin basically bringing them like food and stuff up to the house. So like, was Morrissey not involved at all? And it was a case of kind of like, if you just keep your mouth shut and just go with it, like you'll be like, your family will be looked after type of thing. And it could have even been, I suppose then, even if that was what happened, the other people then who had been there, like let's say Patrick Cunningham, who told him that he had saw Larry die and that it was Morrissey, he might have seen Cashin do it, but it was kind of a case of saying, listen, just say it was whoever, or, think like maybe he had been given a bit of money or something, you don't know. So obviously there's a few different kind of ideas that could have, of what happened. Like Morrissey pushed him and he died. But if Morrissey didn't have the social standing to be in the pub, then why would he have been there that day? If Cashin pushed him and, allowed people to say it was Morris, as I said, could he have bribed the other lads in the pub, to keep shut? And then the whole thing of, did he die at the pub or did he die at the barracks? I would be inclined to believe that he died at the pub, and everything, if all this stuff happened, that it happened there and then, that it wasn't as messy as bringing him across to the barracks and then later on finding out he's dead and having to go get Cashin again to get his car and all this. I think it's so messy. Now maybe that is what happened. And then there's the case that people think it happened in the barracks. Now, some people say that there was one theory where it happened in the barracks because like that Larry was drunk and that they let him sleep. They brought him up to one of the rooms and let him sleep it off, and that they obviously left then again, but that perhaps when he woke up still kind of drunk, not really knowing where he was, that he fell down the stairs and died. But I think if that is what happened, the Gardaí would have just said, because really you're doing like your civic duty. If someone is too drunk to go home and there's nowhere for them to stay, the civic duty would be to bring them in and keep them safe, I suppose. Now maybe they would have gotten in trouble for then leaving, but I don't know why you wouldn't just say there has been an accident, and it like it's not your fault that Larry got drunk throughout the day. You know what I mean? So I don't really think that that theory holds up. The other theory then obviously is that he was pushed in the pub, you know, hit his head or whatever, and then was brought over to the barracks and then died there. Again, I don't really personally, I think it happened in the pub and it ended in the pub. Unfortunately, that's really where the investigation ends. There were no other leads, there was no other arrests, anything like that. Cashin had been suspended without pay when he had been arrested, and obviously when the trial was over and it had been dropped, he obviously assumed that he'd just be reinstated. But the Department of Education were being a bit like iffy about it, because apparently they didn't really like him anyway, because apparently like he wasn't a good headmaster. Now some people say headmaster, head teacher, and I actually think that that's the same thing. I think it was like one small school and that he was just the main teacher, and then that there was a second teacher who happened to actually be his wife. So I think he was actually teacher and headmaster. But apparently for like 4 or 5 years in a row, he was getting bad marks when he'd have like, you know, his inspections or whatever done. And that's one of the theories, that if something like this had happened where he had been seen to have been in a pub on Christmas Day, that could have been like the final straw for the Department of Education to get rid of him. And so they wanted like an inquiry about this. They didn't want to just let him back in. And on the 28th of March, they actually wrote to him and basically told him to respond to the allegations of the charges, and then to also basically say whether or not he had been in the pub. On the 3rd of April, he replied and denied all the charges and said, you know, kind of said about like, well, like, I even offered my car, like, I offered to drive the Gardaí around to do the investigation and stuff, like. But again, if the Gardaí were involved and he was involved, imagine that, the three of them just driving around doing nothing because they know where Larry is. And so, like, what are you doing? Just driving around pretending to call to people. After a lot of back and forth, anyway, he was finally reinstated in December 1930. In December 1930 as well, Tommy Corbett actually sued the 4 Gardaí. Remember I said there was new Gardaí obviously brought in. So apparently they had interviewed him, they had called him in a second time to be interviewed, and he said that he had been falsely imprisoned and assaulted and stuff, basically meaning that they had beat him to try to get him to talk. And so he actually sued them and won £1,000, and those 4 Gardaí were dismissed, which I kind of feel bad about. Obviously they were beating him now, but like, they were there to do the right thing by trying to find out where Larry was. The Gardaí salary was about £200, so even between the 4 of them, they wouldn't have earned enough per year. This is even before they got fired, to pay off what they owed Corbett. Patrick Whelan also came out pretty well after all this stuff, because he had been in a lot of like arrears and stuff when this whole thing was happening, and that's why his reasoning, the thought process behind why he would have wanted the death covered up, was because his license would have been taken off him and he was already in so much financial distress. So in July 1930, the Whelans sued Waterford News and they got £1,740. Again, remember, like, you're talking about back then, this is a lot of money. But immediately the £700 that Patrick Whelan, like his part of it, was immediately taken and seized by his creditors. So again, this is just showing how much in debt he was. He also had another lawsuit against Cork Examiner. In October 1931, his landlord actually placed like an eviction notice for the arrears of £16, 11 shillings and 8 pennies. And Whelan was able to pay this off then from the money he got from the Cork Examiner. I don't know if Patrick Whelan felt guilty because he knew what happened, or didn't know what happened but felt guilty because it happened in his place, or if he genuinely was trying to taunt people. But after the visit to Mary in January, he then sent a letter on the 6th of February. It was basically like, so far no trace of poor Larry. And he was basically saying that he was going to arrange a search of the Glens Bog that he's obsessed with, and basically said like to get Jack to come be involved. The audacity, like, he was basically saying like the guards won't find him, they're right there going. Mary actually brought the letter straight to the guards. In April 1932, Patrick Whelan wrote to the Minister for Justice, and he basically was asking for permission to use explosives in Glens Bog to try like blow the water out. So the Minister for Justice actually contacted An Garda Síochána and asked what they thought. They said that they knew it wasn't in the bog, and they actually reckoned that Patrick Whelan knows where the body is, but they said yeah to grant it anyway under Garda supervision. So the Minister for Justice wrote back to Patrick Whelan, and he said yeah you can do it, but you basically need to apply to your local Garda station for a permit for the explosives. Nothing came from this. He never done it. So like, I don't know. He's just a bit of a mad one. The Whelans weren't the only ones who sued people. In 1954, Garda Murphy and Garda Sullivan won cases against a British newspaper, Empire News, for cases against libel. I don't know what amount they won. In 1961, 4 of the defendants sued Sunday Telegraph for £2,000 each, and this case was settled, so we don't know what they actually got. In 1974, Waterford News and Star was sued for a review of a play. So basically, someone wrote a play called Prisoners of Silence, and it was inspired by the story of Larry Griffin. And so the newspaper wrote a review of it, and they sued because they were basically saying like it implied like their guilt or whatever. As far as I know, then that play wasn't shown. It wasn't performed again for a good few years because of everything because of the fear of this happening again. Harry O'Mara had, kind of from his point of view anyway, had gotten a rough time of everything, and had been he said he was treated unfairly. And so in 1977, the Irish Times actually published like his account of everything that happened, and lo and behold, Patrick Whelan's son and daughter, James and Nora Whelan, sued. Again, that case was settled. Even up as far as the 90s, Cathal O'Shannon suggested covering, so he basically done like a show, Thou Shalt Not Kill, for RTE, the main like Irish broadcaster here, and he suggested covering Larry's disappearance, and like RTE shut it down. They were like, no. And do you know why? Because James Whelan was still alive. James Whelan was in his 80s, and they basically knew that if they were to do it, he would sue. In 1930, obviously, they needed another postman, and so 21-year-old Mike Murphy took the position. And so from 1930 to 1939, up until World War II started, he was given a Garda escort every day from the 5 Crossroads where Larry went missing to Stradbally, and then back again that evening, and that went on until World War II started. Mike actually worked for that as a postman for that town then for 25 years, and so before he moved on then, he was presented with like a clock and some money in Whelan's pub by James Whelan, the man who was basically had been essentially charged with his predecessor's disappearance. Mad. Larry's bike, the one that had been found, had remained in Stradbally barracks for years. Obviously, I'd say at first because, in case they needed it, or, for evidence, or I don't know, maybe in the first few days it was in the hope that he'd be back. I don't know. But in 1943, the postmaster from Kilmacthomas had been told then by his superiors that he was to get the bike back. And so he did, and obviously then it was like redistributed to another postman. Over the years, speculation and rumours turned into folklore. And so, Larry has essentially been buried all over Ireland. There's stories of him being buried in Limerick and Louth and all over Waterford. Like, there are theories that his body was actually moved several times, that he had been buried somewhere originally, and then, kind of after the investigation started, it was moved, this type of thing. There's also the theory that on the night, they drove to Ballyvoyle Bridge, and apparently there was like roadworks going on here at the time, and it is said that he was buried under the roadworks, and the next morning, when the construction continued, they just tarmacked over Larry's body. I saw one source say that in 2012 they actually used like underground survey techniques or whatever to try look in different places for his body, but again, it led nowhere. Thomas Cashin, as I said, had been involved, he was a Republican, so he had been involved in the IRA, and if it's one thing that the IRA know what to do, it's how to make a body disappear. If Cashin was involved, chances are they knew where to put the body, so it'll never be found. One of the theories about, remember the mine shaft? One of the things was they originally were saying that if they were to try pump the water out, but apparently it would cost, at the time they were saying it would cost close to £30,000, again back then, a lot of money. And the other worry was that because the tides were going in and out, if Larry's body had been in the shaft, because the water was going in and out, his body could have actually been brought out and either brought out to sea, or it would have gotten stuck then under the ground basically, and then it would never be found. Larry's wife Mary, who had already suffered tragedy, like she lost a child, when they were young, and she lost another child just 5 years before Larry went missing. It is said that she really struggled with his disappearance. Like your partner is gone, like. But more tragedy would follow for Mary when Alice died of pneumonia in 1933, so only 3 years after. And in 1947, her brother and nephew went out on a boat to fish, and there had been a storm, and their bodies went missing and were found washed up a month later. And there was no widow's pension, so like Mary had nothing to support her. A fund essentially was set up, and £200 was raised. This was by editors of the local newspaper, the chairman of the Waterford County Council, the local priests in Kilmacthomas, locals and local businesses and stuff like that. But it is said that the only people out of Stradbally to donate were the convent. So I think it's a very sad thought, because if Larry was so loved by the town and stuff like that, even if all this other dodgy stuff was going on, you'd think the town would have made some effort, or so I don't know, it just feels like it went very sour. Perhaps it was because of a sense of shame, because they knew what happened there. Mary believed that the Whelans and Cashin were involved in the disappearance of her husband, and when one of the newspapers was actually being sued, she testified for them. Mary died in 1958 and she was aged 83. In 1932, their son Jack opened a garage in Waterford because cars were starting to kind of become a thing then. In 1947, he met and married Bridie, and they had 2 sons. Jack died in 1983, and Bridie, who was 99 last year in an article, at the end of December, it said she was 99. She actually still lives there. Her sons run the garage. She said that her and Jack actually lived with Mary for a while they were saving for a house. And she said Mary would speak of Larry often, and she actually said that over the years she would get letters to say where Larry's body was. She would go to the guards with the letters, but nothing would come from it. Larry's daughter Bridie, who had been living in England, married Tom Mulrennan in 1946, and in 1949 they moved back to Ireland, to his local area in Mayo. Her son Seamus Mulrennan said that her mother never spoke about the tragedy in the family, and so that for years he actually didn't even know about it. In his book, which is amazing, it has so much more details even than what I'm telling you here, just so much. It took me forever to read it. The Missing Postman, Faulkner O'Driscoll says that he actually got access to the National Archives. There was photos and reports and stuff, but that he was told that all the physical evidence wasn't there and that they didn't know where it was. In an RTE documentary on the case, one of the Gardaí in it says if this had happened today, it would have been solved in a week, because of the technology with DNA and stuff we have now. And even if they had the physical stuff now, if they did have the stove or the floorboards or something, maybe, or even the clothing, now they probably wouldn't be too small for them to test. Faulkner also says that the subject in Stradbally is still quite taboo even now. At the launch of his book, he basically was talking about how there was a history book done of Stradbally, and that it wasn't even mentioned. And he said that a woman came forward to him who had started teaching, moved to Stradbally to teach in the 90s, and that apparently she brought up the story or whatever in class, and apparently the following day a parent came in and said do not talk about that in here again. Even in the book he kind of talks about other journalists and stuff who had a hard time if they tried to go to Stradbally to talk to anybody. So it still seems to be very quite a tight-knit kind of area. I'm a bit tempted when lockdown ends to go for a drive down to Waterford and scope it out. Everyone who was involved in the case is now dead. Larry's family, though, his grandchildren and stuff, are still haunted by the fact that they don't know where his body is. He was denied a Christian burial. He's not laid to rest with his partner Mary, his love. This case was a huge embarrassment to obviously the newly formed government and to An Garda Síochána. Last year on December 27th, a plaque was actually unveiled at Kilmacthomas post office to commemorate the 90 years since Larry has been missing. So he's missing 91 now. And like I said, Bridie 99 was actually was there. This case is quite sad. Missing people are the cases that fascinate me the most. I don't understand, like these days I don't understand how people can just go, just vanish into thin air when we have so much like CCTV and technology and stuff like that. And I understand like that back then they didn't have any of that. But like Larry wasn't alone. He didn't just disappear in the middle of the night on a empty, lonely road. He was surrounded by people he knew. Like he was in a pub, the pub that belonged to a friend. He was surrounded by people that he had known for 14 years, that he had met every day, going there and handing them their post, chatting, all of that. Like back then, the postman was such a friendly social thing, and it's just a bit of a kind of like a lonely thought that he died the way he died, or went missing. Like how you go missing surrounded by people you know. The chances of him ever being found at this stage are very, very, very unlikely. And it is a case that obviously maybe plagues Stradbally, but it's one that should be talked about because it should never have happened. Like, if he was pushed and it was an accident, then it was an accident. But what you chose to do after that, to protect yourselves, is the problem. That's the issue. That's the crime. And then for the people who were there, who weren't even directly implicated, didn't have anything, weren't the ones who pushed them, weren't the ones who tried to get rid of them or anything, but they were just there. Your silence means you are complicit. You are complicit with that crime, and you were just as guilty. This was a long one again, but I thought it was a really interesting case. I actually only came across this case this year. Isn't that mad? And yeah, it just was bizarre, and I just thought it was one that you guys might like. I enjoyed reading up on it. Hopefully you enjoyed watching and listening, and thank you for watching and listening. Yeah, we will see you in the next video. Thanks. Bye.